Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I know it's a little bit disappointing for some of you with phase two, but I have good news in that over 700 positions were not filled. So there are plenty of positions available. And in looking at the data, which we'll look at in just a minute, it's pretty clear that there's going to be plenty of opportunities for phase two. But I'm going to tell you where you need to add a couple more applications and those that could be reasonably certain of having a chance. But the most important thing I want to get across before we even start is you don't have to wait until the day that you turn in your application to start communicating with these programs. There is chatter all along, all the way up to and including the interviews for the second part. It is not as chaotic as it used to be, but it is certainly reasonable for you to contact dozens of programs asking them if you would be a good fit. And by them telling you, yeah, please send your application, what that can do is it can kind of narrow down your search quite a bit if you have multiple spots and you're very available for many areas. Now, some of you are limited to a smaller area and you've only got a couple of places that you're going to apply to, but again, we want to make it as good as we can. So again, about 24 hours is my turnaround in getting that letter of intent done. So I've got the phase two cover letter course, and that can help you as you kind of move through this. So again, I know it's a tough time, but it's reasonable that we can get through this. Hey, Brielle, stop yelling. I'm trying to record. All right. So let's start with what happened with the match this year, and some things changed a little bit. Okay. So the first trend is this red line, and we're on the ASP match stats. And so it's how many applicants participated in the match. And we expected it to go down. But because there are only 600 fewer students in this graduating class than the last graduating class, it only went down from 730 to 690. So 5,730 to 5,690. Okay. Now, this is where the surprise came. There was constant addition of more and more programs, and this is the first time that we have seen a decrease in the number of positions offered from 5,231 to 5,208. It's a small decrease, but it's a first decrease. Now, it's not that, 20 programs left. It might have been that 100 programs were added and 120 were removed. It's going to be something more like that. So when we're talking about this chart, what we're looking at is, are we looking at the number of applicants participating in the match versus the number of positions offered versus the number filled? And you'll notice that the number filled actually went down. Now that's really unusual. We were expecting it to go up as the number of positions offered was increasing and the number of people applying was decreasing. These streams were supposed to cross, and I still think they will in the next 2 years, because next year 600 fewer graduates, and then the year after that 1,200 fewer graduates. So there are going to be many, many fewer graduates, and I think a reasonable number of residencies. But what's happening is, if you don't match for a couple of times, they're just going to get rid of the residency altogether. So what does that mean for you? Okay, so let's go into the data. Okay, so let's start here. The number of people that did not match, 1,226. And I know that those of you that did not match don't need to really be reminded of this. You were like, yeah, I get it. I didn't match. Okay. But there are 1,226 of the people that stayed in the match. Now, remember, 700 people never even got to that point. So of those, 14% said they found something else, and 21% did it for personal reasons. So let's just round it to say that about 66%, or 2/3 of those, would still be interested in a residency. But the question is, if you never got an interview the first time, would you apply again? And I would say yes, if you think it was a bad recommendation. So it's very easy for a single recommendation to completely sink. I know 3 or 4 years of work, which seems crazy. But if you know that you can replace that recommendation and start getting interviews, then go ahead. If, however, you think that you know your grades and you're just really not into it and those things, well, you're probably still going to have the same grades and you're probably still not going to be into it. But if we add, let's take 2/3 of 701, right? And so we're taking 200 plus 200, 400, and then around 60. So a little less than 500, let's say. Okay. And we're going to add to the 1226 here. So about 16, 17, 26 altogether. And we have 700 available positions. Now, I would say that a bunch of those are going to fall off. And I'm going to put your odds of getting a match in the second round around a little over 50%. Now, I'm going to quantify that or qualify that depending on the school that you go to. So the average match rate was around 75% overall with all the PGY1 stuff. PGY2 is its own deal because they tend to have more available spaces than they do applicants for them. But with PGY1, I think it's reasonable that you have about a 50-50 shot. So the question is, how can you improve that? Okay, so the first thing is, where did you go to school? Okay, and so as we're looking at these, and it's on the ASHP website, if you look at your school and your number is around or over 74%, then you are probably in good shape. The top 50%, it's a really weird number to get to, but the top 50% of residency matching schools, okay, so those that were over the 74% mark, tend to get 80% of the phase two matches. And you say, well, why is that? Well, it's more like a waterfall. So think about it. Let's go down to North Carolina, which has traditionally been one of the kind of best matching schools, though I think University of Montana actually matched 15 for 15. So you can't beat 100%. But you can see that there were 9 students from the University of North Carolina that didn't match. So imagine you're a phase 2 RPD and an application comes from the UNC where like, oh, wow, we've got a UNC applicant. This is great. We know that they generally match well. Let's invite them for an interview. Okay. And then you've got another school where the match rate is quite low. And you're like, well, I don't really know this school. I don't really know them. I don't really know how to evaluate them. And so that person is going to have to put in many more applications than the UNC student. It seems like it's a little bit unfair. Shouldn't you just be, graded on yourself and not the school that you went to? And the answer is not really, because when we think about these schools, we think about how hard was it relative to your classmates. So it's very much like if you played soccer, there's like rec, there's select, and then there's, a little bit higher than select, or there's in volleyball, there's regional teams, national teams, and so forth. And there really is a demarcation between the top schools by percentage for residency and the lower 50%. And it's not necessarily the U.S. News. Actually, the U.S. News is a very poor match of this, especially for private schools, which can match at a very, very high rate. So when you're looking at matching, if you're over that 75% mark, I would definitely take a chance and go into phase 2. You are going to have normally a 50% chance, right? But because you're in one of those top schools, your percentage now goes up a little bit. It's actually a little more than a little bit because you are a student that is at a school that is kind of like, okay, well, now we have a smaller pool of applicants. Okay, I'm seeing a couple of schools that I recognize. I see Minnesota, I see Iowa, I see UNC, and those types of things. Okay, and then you look at the other schools, and RPDs can look at this chart just as anybody else and see that, well, what's going on that a lot of people didn't really take people from this school. What's going on that the match rate is a little bit lower. And then maybe you look at the NABPLEX pass rate or the MPJE, and the RPDs still have to think about that, like, right? So they don't want to have a class where, maybe they got 4 residents and 3 of them fail the NABPLEX. They can't staff their weekends. They can't staff their nights. It's an absolute nightmare, right? So again, if you are especially, you take the way to do the math is, for example, Auburn had 53 active with the list and 40 matched. So that's right around that 75, 77%. Samford, about the same. Arkansas, maybe a little bit higher. Harding, a little bit. That's pretty close. So again, you've got to take your match number over your active with list number, and whatever percentage that works out to be, that's really where you want to go, with knowing, okay, we're in the top half. It's reasonable for me to expect that a lot of us are going to match. There are a lot of positions open. Now, when we look at the positions, now we have to look at what they are in terms of filled and unfilled. So when you go to that document, you see that there are 550 unfilled PGY1s, but there are 133 unfilled communities. So when you look at what's actually available and what you would have a much more likely chance to get, it's pretty clear that when you started with 3,000, PGY1s and 300 communities, and then you end up with, 550 left over after that 3,000 and 130 left over after offering 300, you can see that the preference is certainly to hospital, because I don't, uh, I'm very in tune with the community pharmacy residency. I think they're very valuable, but the thing is that it's not the barrier that it is for hospital. With hospital jobs, it is very much a barrier to not have a residency. With community pharmacy, it just makes you a significantly more better community pharmacist, and certainly there's an entrepreneurial component. And then there are a number of those PGY 1 and 2 health system administration and leaderships that are available as well. But just know that if you're going to be going for a community program, your chances will be significantly higher of getting a residency. So if you're looking at kind of location and you're like, well, I want AmCare, but all that's available is community, maybe a community is the way to go. So my wife, for example, did a community residency and has an ambulatory care position. She's been in at the VA for a very long time. She loves her position, and we were very lucky to get it. And again, community can turn into ambulatory care. Now, can it turn into, PGY2 in ED or cardiology? I don't know if that would be the case. But again, if you're just looking for a residency that's going to kind of lead you towards maybe an ambulatory care position, maybe the community is something that you can do depending on what they offer. So kind of moving on to how did they do, I think the take home here is that programs were willing to go down to their 12th on average. So there's a ratio of least preferred match ranked to positions filled, and that average is right at 3. So 3 means that if you have 4 residency available, you went to your ratio of 3. So it'd be 3 times, if you have 4 people in the residency, then you would have gone down to your 12th choice. Now they could have gotten their first, second, third, and 12th choice, but on average, that's how far they went. Now, they can go to 4 or higher. So if you were up to 4, that means they went down to their 16th choice. On the other hand, it's much more likely that a student is going to get their first, second, or third choice. But it's much more likely that the residency program is going to go much lower in their choices. So anyway, to kind of summarize here, I think you can do it regardless. I have talked to people that have been in a school that has a very low match rate, but matched in phase 2 because they were literally the best student that was left at that school. And I've also talked to multiple students coming from what we, usually consider the schools that have a high percentage, and they just didn't realize that they had a toxic recommendation, or that maybe they were wishy-washy and they were like, well, I want to do AmCare, but I could also do, acute care, and it didn't work out the way they wanted. And they really should have gone with one or the other. So again, my first recommendation: start talking to people right now. Have your moment of sadness, but get over it. There are over 700 positions that were not filled this year, which is higher than last year at around 600. And there are many fewer students that are going to be going for that this year, I think, with the way that things are going with the economy. So I think that there's a reasonable chance. If you want to talk to me, just have questions, TonyThePharmacist@gmail.com. Otherwise, residency.teachable.com/P/phase 2, spelled out as PHASE2. If you want my help, again, I'll get back to you within 24 hours. Again, this is not okay, we'll just kind of work it out. It's just, look, just send me the letter, we'll fix it, we'll get you on the road and get you the confidence back that you need. No one loves anything more than a comeback story, and I certainly do. So this mid 70s match rate that we have now will go well over 80 by the time everything is said and done. But the first thing to do is to start sending off those emails and making sure that you've kind of identified some places that are reasonable for you. And then after that, we'll get going with the application, and it's a quick turnaround. In April, you'll find out and you'll know. And it's not the long, dragged out process this was. So again, congrats to those guys that did match, but I'm here for you if you didn't match. Just let me know how I can help you.